No physician can make him eat, your grace. It is a matter of the will, not the stomach. The words, spoken in the hushed, funereal tone Dr. Albright reserved for the truly hopeless, hung in the chilled air of the Duke of Blackwood's study. They were a death sentence delivered on a silver platter of polite medical jargon. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke himself, stood with his back to the man, staring out at the rain-slicked lawns of his estate. The view, usually a source of immense ancestral pride, was nothing but a smear of melancholic green and grey. Every drop of rain that struck the vast window panes seemed to mock the suffocating dryness in his own throat. For 3 weeks his son, his heir, the 5-year-old Marquis of Ashworth, had been willingly starving himself into a ghost. "The will," Alistair repeated, the words tasting like ash. "He is a child, doctor. What will does a 5-year-old possess that can defy the most basic impulse for survival?" "A formidable one, it would seem," the doctor murmured, snapping his leather bag shut with a sound that was offensively final. "We have tried broths, jellies, custards." He turns his head. "We have tried threats, cajoling. Nothing. The boy is grieving." Alistair's shoulders tightened under the impeccable cut of his black wool coat. Grieving. The word was a stone dropped into the silent, stagnant pool of his life. What had the boy to grieve? His mother had died giving birth to him, a tragedy he could not possibly remember. His life at Blackwood Manor was a clockwork of privilege and comfort. He had ponies and tutors and a legion of servants dedicated to his every whim, except one, the one he wanted. "Leave me," Alistair commanded, his voice low and serrated. He did not turn to watch the doctor depart. He heard the soft click of the door and was alone with the ticking of the grand clock on the mantelpiece. Each tick was a second of his son's life slipping away. Each tock was a hammer blow against the anvil of his own colossal failure. He moved to the massive oak desk, his hand hovering over a stack of estate papers he had no heart to read. His fingers, long and aristocratic, instead found the cold, smooth edge of a small locked drawer. He did not need the key. He had not locked it in 2 years. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, lay a simple silver locket, its surface tarnished with time and neglect. It was hers. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, ambushed him 2 years ago. This very room. The air had been thick, not with rain, but with the cloying scent of his aunt's lavender perfume and the even more suffocating stench of her self-righteous victory. The Dowager Duchess Augusta Beaumont, a woman whose heart was as corseted as her formidable torso, had stood where the doctor had just been. In her gloved hand, she had held a packet of letters tied with a blue ribbon. "I am sorry to be the bearer of such tidings, Alistair," she had said, her voice dripping with a sympathy so false it was almost corrosive. "But I could not stand by and watch you be so thoroughly deceived. The governess, Miss Vance." He had been standing by the fire then, nursing a brandy, a rare feeling of contentment settling over him. Eleanor Vance had been in his employ for a year. She had brought a quiet light into the cavernous, grieving halls of Blackwood. She was intelligent, serene, and she had performed the miracle of making his withdrawn, silent son laugh. Alistair had found himself manufacturing reasons to visit the nursery, just to feel the warmth of her quiet smile, to hear her low, musical voice reading stories about dragons and brave knights. He had been on the precipice of feeling something akin to life again. Then his aunt had produced the letters. He remembered the sick, cold plunge in his gut as he read the cramped, passionate script. Declarations of love, plans for a clandestine meeting, all addressed to a mysterious "My dearest Robert," and all signed with a flourishing E. "It cannot be," he had whispered, the paper crackling in his tightening fist. "The stable boy, Robert, was dismissed this morning," Augusta had supplied, her eyes gleaming. "He confessed everything. She has been meeting him in the woods. A common groom, Alistair. Imagine the scandal. And with the boy in her charge, what sort of influence is that?" The rage had been a blinding, white-hot thing. It was not just the betrayal, but the humiliation. He, the Duke of Blackwood, made a fool of by a governess and a groom. The fragile warmth she had kindled in him curdled into a bitter, icy poison. He had felt his own vulnerability, his own nascent feelings for her, as a weakness she had exploited. He had summoned her to the library. The entire senior staff had been present, a gallery for her humiliation. He remembered the way she entered, a book of poetry still in her hand, a small questioning smile on her face. That smile had died when she saw his expression. "Your Grace?" she had asked, her voice faltering. He had thrown the letters onto the table between them. "Explain these." She had picked one up, her face paling as she scanned the lines. He saw the confusion in her eyes, the dawning horror. I do not understand." "I did not write this. This is not my hand. Do not lie to me." The roar had come from a place of deep, wounded pride. "The groom has confessed. You are dismissed. Pack your things and be gone within the hour. You will not receive a reference. You are lucky I do not have you thrown in jail." He would never forget the look on her face in that moment. The shock had bled away, replaced by something still and cold and utterly devastating. It was not guilt, it was not fear, it was a profound and absolute contempt. It was the look of a queen surveying a barbarian. Her spine had straightened, her chin had lifted, and the quiet governess had vanished, replaced by a woman forged in ice. "As you wish, Your Grace," she had said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She had not pleaded, she had not cried. She had simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving a silence that had never truly lifted since. He had gone to her room later, after she had gone. It was neat, impersonal, stripped of her presence. But on the dresser, left behind as if it were worthless, was the silver locket she always wore. He had picked it up, a symbol of the life she had discarded, the life he had shattered. He had kept it, a small cold piece of his own damnation. Now 2 years later, that single act of prideful fury was costing him his son. Julian had loved her. For a year, Eleanor Vance had been his sun and moon. Her sudden, unexplained disappearance had been a trauma from which the boy had never recovered. The succession of stern, appropriate governesses who followed had been met with a wall of silent hostility. And now, this quiet, terrifying rebellion, this slow, deliberate suicide. Alistair shut the drawer. The click echoed the doctor's bag, another door closing on hope. "It is a matter of the will," he said to the empty room. He walked to the bell pull and gave it a sharp, decisive tug. His valet appeared so quickly he must have been waiting just outside the door. "Your Grace?" "Find Mr. Davies," Alistair commanded, referring to his man of business. "Tell him I need to locate a person, a Miss Eleanor Vance, former governess. I do not care what it costs or what it takes. I want to know where she is, today." The search did not take long. A woman of gentle birth, cast out with no reference and no money, does not simply vanish. She falls, and the fall can be traced. Davies, a man of discreet and unnerving efficiency, reported back within 2 days. Miss Vance was in Oakhaven, a small, dreary village some 50 miles distant. She was no longer Miss Vance, but Mrs. Smith, a widow. She lived in a tiny 2-room cottage at the edge of the village and earned a meager living as a seamstress. Alistair listened to the report in stony silence. The image of Eleanor, her hands elegant on the keys of a piano, or turning the page of a book, now bent over needlework in a cramped cottage, was a physical blow. He had not just dismissed her, he had destroyed her. He had taken her gentle, educated world and thrown it onto a bonfire of his own making. "She lives alone?" Alistair asked, his voice rough. "So it would appear, Your Grace," Davies said, shuffling his papers. "The villagers say she keeps to herself. A very quiet, respectable woman, if a poor one." Alistair waved a dismissive hand. He needed to think. His first instinct was ducal, imperious. He would send a carriage. He would summon her. He would pay her whatever she wanted to come back and fix the problem she had, in his twisted logic of 2 years ago, created. But the memory of her face in the library gave him pause. The cold contempt. That was not a woman who could be summoned or bought. Not anymore. He had seen to that. He made a decision. It was impulsive, irrational, and utterly beneath a man of his station. "Ready my horse," he said to his valet. "I am riding out, and pack a bag. I may be gone for some time." The ride to Oakhaven was a journey through a landscape of guilt. The rhythmic pounding of his horse's hooves on the muddy road was a metronome counting out his sins, pride, cruelty, blindness. He had possessed all the power in their exchange, and he had used it like a cudgel. He had believed the worst of her because it was easier than believing he himself could be worthy of the quiet affection he had seen growing in her eyes. He had been a coward, hiding behind the armor of his title. Oakhaven was even more grim than he had imagined. A huddle of gray-stone cottages crouched under a perpetually weeping sky. The inn was small, smelling of damp wool and stale beer. He took a room, ignoring the innkeeper's gaping stare at his fine clothes and the ducal crest on his saddlebags. He gave his name as Mr. Beaumont. He did not go to her cottage immediately. He needed to see her first, unobserved. He waited until dusk, the time of day when lamps were lit and curtains were not yet drawn. Her cottage was the last one on the village lane, small and hunched, with a tiny patch of garden where a few sad-looking cabbages wilted in the rain. He stood in the shadow of a large oak tree, the damp seeping into his boots, and he watched. A single lamp cast a warm yellow glow inside. He saw her move past the window, a silhouette, and then she came closer, standing for a moment to look out into the gathering dark, and his breath caught in his chest. It was Eleanor, but it was not. The woman at the window was thinner, her face sharpened by something more than just the loss of youthful softness. There were lines of weariness around her eyes that had not been there before. Her glorious auburn hair, which she used to wear in a soft, elegant coronet, was pulled back in a severe, practical knot. She was wearing a simple, patched dress of dark grey wool, but the most profound change was in her hands. As she raised one to brush a stray strand of hair from her face, he saw that it was no longer the soft, pale hand of a gentlewoman. It was the hand of a worker, the knuckles slightly swollen, the fingertips pricked and calloused. He felt a wave of something akin to nausea. This was his work. This transformation. He had taken a songbird and broken its wings, forcing it to scrabble in the dirt for survival. He watched for what felt like an hour as she moved about the small room, preparing a simple meal, tidying away her work for the day. There was an economy to her movements, a weary grace that spoke of a long and bitter accommodation with her new life. She had survived. She had endured the ruin he had inflicted upon her, and she had remade herself. The respect he felt was a sharp, painful thing. It dwarfed his pity and his guilt. He knew then that his initial plan was folly. He could not command this woman. He could not buy her. He would have to do something he had not done in a very long time. He would have to beg. The next morning, he walked to her door. The rain had stopped, but the world was still dripping and grey. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. He knocked, the sound unnervingly loud in the morning quiet. He heard movement inside, the bolt being drawn. The door opened a few inches, and he was looking at her again. Close up, the changes were even more stark. The fine skin beneath her eyes was smudged with fatigue. But the eyes themselves, they were the same. A clear, startling green, and they widened now in stunned, horrified recognition. "You," she breathed, the word a puff of disbelief. "Miss Vance?" he said, his voice a low gravel. He had forgotten how to speak to her. "Eleanor." Her expression shuddered instantly. The shock was replaced by that same glacial contempt he remembered from the library. It was colder now, honed by 2 years of hardship. "I am Mrs. Smith now," she said, her voice flat. "And you are trespassing, Your Grace. This is a private residence." She made to close the door. His hand shot out, not to touch her, but to press flat against the wood, holding it open. It was a gesture of ingrained arrogance, and he immediately regretted it as he saw her flinch. "Please," he said, and the word felt strange and rusty in his mouth. "Do not close the door. I must speak with you." "We have nothing to speak about," she said, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the door. "You made your feelings on all subjects quite clear 2 years ago. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. My patrons, unlike yours, expect me to earn my keep." The barb struck home, sharp and precise. "It is about my son," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "It is about Julian." Her face, which had been a mask of ice, flickered. A tiny spasm of concern, so faint he might have imagined it. "I am sorry to hear that," she said, her voice still level, but the ice had a hairline crack in it. "I hope the Marquis is well." "He is not," Alistair said, seizing the opening. "He is ill, very ill. The physicians can do nothing." He took a breath, forcing himself to strip away the ducal pride and show her the raw, terrified father beneath. "He is starving himself, Eleanor. He will not eat. It has been 3 weeks. He asks for you." That last part was a lie. Julian asked for no one. He was silent. But it was a necessary lie, a desperate gambit. He saw the truth of his words land in her eyes. He saw the struggle there. The woman she was now, the hard, pragmatic survivor, fought with the woman she had been, the loving governess who had adored his son. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. "Because you are the only one who can help him," he said. "I am asking you to come back to Blackwood." She laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was harsh and brittle, the sound of something breaking. "Come back?" she repeated, her eyes blazing with a sudden, furious fire. "You stand on my doorstep, after throwing me out like a piece of trash, after destroying my name and my life, and you ask me to come back? To what? To be the subject of servants' gossip again? To be at the mercy of your vile temper and your poisonous family? Do you think I am a fool?" "I will pay you," he said, falling back on the only language of power he truly understood. "Whatever you ask. Name your price." It was the worst thing he could have said. Her hand came up, and for a heart-stopping second, he thought she was going to strike him. Instead, she pointed a trembling finger at his chest. "You think you can buy me?" she hissed, her voice thick with disgust. "You think your money can repair the damage you have done? It cannot. There is not enough gold in your vaults to buy back my reputation. There is not enough to erase the nights I went hungry, or the shame of being turned away from every respectable post, or the feel of my hands cracking and bleeding from work they were never meant to do." She took a ragged breath, her whole body shaking with the force of her anger. "You come here and you speak of your son. What about my life? Did you give it a moment's thought when you cast me out? No, you did not. You wanted a villain for your wounded pride, and I was convenient. So you can take your ducal carriage and your ducal money and your ducal problems, and you can leave my home." The door slammed in his face. The bolt shot home with a definitive, final thud. Alistair stood on the muddy path, stunned into silence. He had faced down cabinet ministers and hostile foreign dignitaries. He had never been so thoroughly routed in his life. Every word she had spoken was the truth, and the truth was a lash that flayed him to the bone. He did not leave Oakhaven. He returned to the inn, his mind a maelstrom of her words. He had expected tears, pleas, perhaps a bitter acceptance. He had not expected this righteous, incandescent fury. He had not expected this strength. The Eleanor he remembered would have been crushed. This woman, this Mrs. Smith, was forged from steel. He spent the day in his cold, damp room at the inn, pacing like a caged animal. He sent a frantic, coded message back to Blackwood, demanding an update on Julian's condition. The reply came by evening express rider. "No change, Your Grace. Weaker." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He was running out of time. Force had failed. Bribery had failed. He was a duke. He was used to his will being law, but his power was useless here. Her small cottage was a more formidable fortress than any castle he had ever besieged. He had to change tactics. He had to dismantle the reason for her anger. He had to understand the source of his own catastrophic mistake. He sat down at the rickety table in his room and forced himself to relive that day in the library 2 years ago. He pushed past the memory of his own rage and tried to see it clearly. Augusta, the letters, Eleanor's denial, the letters. He had been so certain. The handwriting had looked like hers. The sentiments, while shocking, had been convincing in their passion, but had he ever truly examined them? No. He had accepted his aunt's word. He had let her guide his wrath. He sent another message, this one to his solicitor in London. It contained a single, urgent instruction: to go to Blackwood Manor, open the safe in the Duke's study, and retrieve a packet of letters tied with a blue ribbon. They were to be brought to him in Oakhaven with the utmost speed and discretion. While he waited, he began a new campaign. It was one of quiet, desperate patience. He could not approach Eleanor directly, but he could make his presence known. He started by speaking to the innkeeper, a stout, wary woman named Mrs. Croft. He learned she was a widow, and that she had been one of the first in the village to show Eleanor, or Mrs. Smith, any kindness. She was fiercely protective of her friend. "A sad story, that one," Mrs. Croft said one evening, as she placed a plate of mutton before him. "Came here with nothing but the clothes on her back and a look in her eyes like she'd seen the end of the world. Works her fingers to the bone, keeps to herself. A lady, though, you can tell, no matter how worn her dress is." Alistair saw his opening. He did not tell her who he was. He presented himself as a father tormented by a family tragedy. "My son is very ill, Mrs. Croft," he said, his voice low. "There was a woman, a governess, who was very dear to him. There was a terrible misunderstanding. She left our home. I believe she is the only one who can help him now." He looked the innkeeper in the eye. "I believe she is your Mrs. Smith." Mrs. Croft's eyes widened, then narrowed in suspicion. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "The kind that a proud, foolish man creates and a good woman suffers for," Alistair said, the confession costing him dearly. "I wronged her, terribly. Now my son pays the price. He is fading. The doctors say it is only a matter of days." He saw the woman's calculation. The suspicion warred with the sympathy. He was not asking for her help in deceiving Eleanor. He was asking for her help in telling her the truth. "I will tell her what you said," Mrs. Croft said finally, "about the boy. The rest is between you and her, and God." He did not see Eleanor for the next 2 days. He remained at the inn, a prisoner of his own making. The entire village was now aware of the strange, wealthy gentleman who had taken up residence and seemed to do nothing but stare out the window in the direction of the seamstress's cottage. He was a scandal, a mystery. He endured the stares and the whispers. It was a small penance. On the third day, the solicitor arrived. He was a small, precise man, his face a mask of professional discretion as he handed over the oilskin-wrapped package. Alistair dismissed him and locked the door to his room. His hands trembled as he untied the faded blue ribbon. The letters. They felt different in his hands now, not like weapons, but like artifacts from a crime scene. He spread them out on the table. He read them again, but this time he was not looking at the words. He was looking at the paper, the ink, the penmanship. The paper was the first clue. It was thick, creamy, with a distinctive watermark in the corner, a small stylized stag's head. He had seen it before. He had seen it every day of his life. It was the watermark of the personal stationery he used in his study at Blackwood, stationery Eleanor would have had no access to. His heart began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. He examined the handwriting. It was a good imitation of Eleanor's elegant, sloping script. But it was an imitation. It was too perfect, too uniform. Eleanor's real handwriting, he recalled from the notes she left about Julian, was looser, more fluid. This was the work of a careful forger, someone who had copied her style meticulously. But there were tells, a slight, consistent difference in the way the letter T was crossed, a hesitation in the loops of the G's and Y's. It was a forgery. A masterful, malicious, and utterly devastating forgery, and he knew with a certainty that left him cold and sick who had done it. Augusta, his kind, concerned, lavender-scented aunt, the woman who had discovered the letters, the woman who had always subtly undermined his choices since his wife's death, who had warned him against forming an unsuitable attachment to the governess, the woman who stood to gain influence and control if he remained unmarried, isolated, and dependent on her advice. The rage that filled him now was 1,000 times colder and more lethal than the hot, prideful anger he had felt 2 years ago. This was the rage of a man who looks into the abyss and sees his own monumental stupidity staring back. He had been a puppet, a blind, arrogant fool, and he had danced to his aunt's tune, destroying the one good thing that had entered his life. He knew what he had to do. He did not ride to London. He sent a telegram. It was a weapon, not a message. He did not accuse. He did not question. He commanded. Augusta was to meet him at Blackwood Manor in 2 days' time. She was to bring her personal ledgers and correspondence for the past 3 years. The implication was clear. This was not a social visit. It was an audit, an inquisition. Then, with the forged letters in his coat pocket, he walked back to Eleanor's cottage. This time, when he knocked, the door was opened by Mrs. Croft. "She will see you," the innkeeper said, her expression grim. "Do not waste her time, sir. Or mine." Eleanor was standing by the cold hearth, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked exhausted, but the fire in her eyes had been banked, not extinguished. "Mrs. Croft told me about your son," she said, without preamble. Her voice was flat, weary. "She says he is dying." "He is," Alistair said, "and it is my fault, all of it." He stepped forward and laid the letters on the small table between them. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raw. "These are forgeries. I believe my aunt, the Dowager Duchess, created them. I was a blind, arrogant fool, and I believed her lies because it was easier than trusting my own heart." She stared at the letters, then up at his face. She saw no ducal pride there now, only a vast, hollowed-out landscape of regret. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice a thread. "Because it is the truth," he said, "and because I need you to understand that the man who threw you out of his house 2 years ago was a monster of his own making. I do not ask you to forgive that man. He does not deserve it. I am asking you to help a little boy who loves you, and I am begging you to give the man I am trying to become a chance to atone for what he has done." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tarnished silver locket. He placed it on top of the letters. "I kept this," he said quietly. I think it was the only honest thing I did that day." She looked at the locket, the small, intimate piece of her past, lying there amidst the evidence of his betrayal. He saw a single tear trace a path through the grime on her cheek. She did not wipe it away. She was silent for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of a small clock on her mantelpiece, a cheap and tinny echo of the grand clock at Blackwood. "I will come," she said at last, her voice barely a whisper. "For Julian, only for Julian," These are my terms. I am to be hired as his nurse. I will be paid a salary, a generous one. I will have complete and total authority over the nursery and the boy's care. I answer to no one but myself. I am not your guest. I am not your friend. I am an employee. Do you understand? I understand, he said, a wave of relief so profound it almost brought him to his knees. Whatever you want. Anything. I want my life back, she said, her voice hardening again. But since you cannot give me that, I will take the salary. The journey back to Blackwood was a silent, tense affair. Eleanor, now dressed in a new, sober travelling dress that Alistair had arranged for Mrs. Croft to purchase, sat opposite him in the carriage, her face a pale, unreadable mask. She looked out the window, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape, refusing to meet his eyes. He did not press her. He had won the battle, but the war for her forgiveness had not yet begun. They arrived at Blackwood as dusk was falling. The great house was lit up, but it seemed to generate no warmth. It was a mausoleum waiting for its last occupant. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, met them at the door, her face etched with worry. "Your Grace," she breathed, her eyes darting nervously to the woman standing behind him. She recognized Eleanor, of course. The entire staff would be buzzing within minutes. "Miss Vance is here to care for Lord Julian," Alistair announced, his voice carrying through the great hall. "She is to be given every assistance. Her authority in the nursery is absolute. Is that understood?" Mrs. Gable, a woman who had been a loyal ally to Eleanor during her first tenure, nodded, a glimmer of hope in her tired eyes. "Yes, Your Grace. Of course. Welcome back, miss." Eleanor gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice tight. "In the nursery, miss," Mrs. Gable said. "He has not left his bed today." Eleanor did not look at Alistair. She simply untied the ribbons of her bonnet and handed it to a waiting footman. "Please have a tray sent up," she said, her voice suddenly crisp and professional. "A simple one. Soup, bread, a little cheese, and a glass of milk." "For the boy, miss?" Mrs. Gable asked. "No," Eleanor said, already moving towards the grand staircase. "For me." Alistair watched her ascend the stairs, her back straight, her steps sure. She was not the gentle governess anymore. She was a general taking command of a battlefield. He followed her, keeping a respectful distance. He stood in the doorway of the nursery as she entered. The room was just as he remembered it, filled with expensive toys and books, but it felt dead. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of sickness and despair. Julian was in his bed, a small, pathetic lump under a mountain of blankets. His face was pale and translucent, his eyes huge and dark in his shrunken face. He held a small, battered wooden soldier in one hand. He did not look up as Eleanor entered. Eleanor did not go to him. She did not rush to his bedside with coos and endearments. She walked calmly to the window and drew back the heavy velvet curtains, letting the last of the grey evening light into the room. She surveyed the scene, her expression grim. A moment later, a footman arrived with the tray. He set it down on a small table near the fire and retreated. Eleanor pulled a chair up to the table. She sat down, her back to the boy's bed. She unfolded her napkin and placed it in her lap. With deliberate, unhurried movements, she began to eat. Alistair watched, mesmerized. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft clink of Eleanor's spoon against her bowl and the crackle of the fire. She ate the soup. She buttered a piece of bread and ate that too. She poured herself the glass of milk. From the bed, there was a tiny, rustling sound. Alistair saw Julian slowly, painfully, push himself up on his elbows. His gaze was fixed on Eleanor's back. He watched her eat, his expression one of intense, bewildered concentration. Eleanor finished her meal. She wiped her lips with her napkin. She sat for a moment, simply looking into the fire. She had not once acknowledged the child in the room. She had not spoken a word. She had simply claimed the space, filled it with her calm, steady presence, and performed the most ordinary of human acts. She ate. Then Julian spoke. His voice was a dry, cracking whisper, a sound no one had heard for days. "Miss Vance?" Eleanor turned her head slowly. She looked at him, her face calm. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice soft but not pitying. "I was hungry." The boy stared at her, his eyes wide. He looked at the empty bowl on her tray. He looked at the wooden soldier clutched in his own hand. It was the one she had carved for him so long ago. He swallowed, a painful, difficult motion. I am hungry too, he whispered. Alistair felt the breath leave his body in a rush. He backed away from the door, his eyes stinging. He felt a profound, earth-shaking shift in the foundations of his world. It was not a physician's skill or a father's command that had broken the siege. It was the quiet, defiant strength of a wronged woman who understood that the first step to healing a wound is not to fuss over it, but to simply show that it is possible to live again. He went downstairs to his study and poured himself a brandy, but this time it was not to numb the emptiness. It was to toast the first fragile glimmer of hope he had felt in 2 long, barren years. The next day, Augusta arrived. She swept into Blackwood like a galleon in full sail, all black silk and imperious pronouncements, her face a mask of feigned concern. "Alistair, my dear boy," she boomed, presenting a powdered cheek for him to kiss. "This telegram, so alarming. I came at once. How is the poor child?" "He is better," Alistair said, his voice dangerously calm. He did not kiss her. He led her into the study and closed the doors. "I have had some interesting documents returned to me, Aunt," he began, walking to his desk. He picked up the forged letters. "Do you recognize these?" He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, quickly masked by confusion. "Good heavens, are those the dreadful letters from that governess? I had hoped you had burned them." "I am glad I did not," Alistair said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "because I have had them examined. The paper is from this very desk. The handwriting is a clever forgery, a very clever forgery." He let the silence stretch, watching the color drain from her face. "Alistair, I cannot imagine what you are implying," she began, her voice trembling. "You will be silent now," he interrupted, his tone lethal. "You will listen. You engineered this entire affair. You lied to me. You destroyed an innocent woman's life. And you nearly killed my son. You did it for a taste of power, to keep your claws in my life and my fortune." He stepped closer, his fury a palpable force in the room. "I have already instructed my solicitor. Your allowance is terminated. You will remove yourself from the Dowager House by the end of the month. You will not be received here or at any of my properties ever again. If I hear your name mentioned in society in any context other than a quiet retirement to the country, I will release the full story of your forgery and your malice to the press. You will be ruined, utterly and completely. Do I make myself clear?" Augusta stared at him, her face a ruin of shock and impotent rage. The mask had fallen away, revealing the grasping, venomous creature beneath. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Get out of my house," Alistair said, his voice flat and final. She fled. Upstairs, life in the nursery had found a new, quiet rhythm. Eleanor had moved into the adjoining suite. She never raised her voice, she never pleaded or cajoled. She simply established a routine. Meals were served at precise times. She ate with Julian, talking to him not about his health, but about books and horses and the world outside the window. She read to him. She sat with him while he sketched. She treated Alistair with a cool, professional distance. She delivered daily reports on Julian's progress, her voice crisp, her eyes avoiding his. She was the perfect employee, and it was a form of torture. He wanted to talk to her, to explain, to bridge the chasm between them, but her wall was impenetrable. He knew words were not enough. He had to show her. He began by making her life easier. He ensured her salary was paid into a bank account opened in her name. He gave her an unlimited budget for the nursery, for books, clothes, anything she deemed necessary. He made sure the staff treated her with the deference due to a visiting dignitary. Then he began his own atonement. He brought her the evidence of Augusta's downfall, the solicitor's letters, the notice of eviction. He laid them before her one evening in the library. "She will never trouble you or this family again," he said. He did not ask for a reaction. He simply stated the fact. Eleanor looked at the papers, her expression unreadable. "Vengeance is not justice, Your Grace," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "it is not, but it is a start." He found other ways to try and reach her. He learned she missed having a garden. The small patch of cabbages at her cottage had been a sad attempt at creating beauty. He instructed his head gardener to restore the abandoned rose garden, a beautiful secluded spot on the far side of the estate. He did not tell her it was for her. He simply let her discover it on her walks with Julian. One afternoon he saw her there. She was kneeling in the dirt, her fine new dress protected by a gardener's apron, her hands gloved now, but still working, tending to a struggling bush. Julian was nearby, happily digging for worms. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up as his shadow fell over her. "Your Grace," she said, her tone neutral. "Alistair," he corrected her, his voice gentle. "My name is Alistair." She looked away, a faint flush on her cheeks. "The roses are beautiful." "They were my mother's favorite," he said. "The garden has been neglected since she passed." He hesitated. "I thought you might enjoy seeing it brought back to life." It was the closest he had come to a personal admission. She met his eyes then, and for the first time he saw something other than professional courtesy or banked anger. He saw a flicker of the woman he remembered, a flicker of warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. It was a beginning, a tiny seed planted in the restored soil of the garden. The weeks turned into a month, then two. Julian was transformed. The color had returned to his cheeks, the light to his eyes. He was a happy, boisterous 5-year-old again. And he was inseparable from Eleanor. Alistair's courtship, for that is what it had become, was a slow, patient, and often humbling affair. He learned to listen. He asked her opinion on estate matters, and was consistently astonished by her sharp intelligence and practical wisdom. She had ideas for the tenant farms, for the village school. He put her ideas into practice, giving her full credit. He found the book of poetry she had been carrying the day he dismissed her. He had kept it, another relic of his shame. He left it on her pillow one night, with a single, perfect white rose from the garden tucked inside. The next morning at breakfast, she was wearing the rose pinned to her dress. He knew the final barrier was the one he had erected himself, his title. She was an employee, he was the duke. It was an imbalance that could not be sustained if they were ever to find true partnership. He came to her one evening in the nursery after Julian was asleep. She was sitting by the fire, the silver locket around her neck, gleaming in the firelight. She was mending one of Julian's shirts, her hands moving with a familiar, practiced grace. He did not stand over her. He knelt. He knelt on the hearthrug before her, an act of submission so profound it silenced her. The Duke of Blackwood on his knees to his son's governess. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have been a fool, a monster, a coward. I have spent the last 2 months trying to show you that I can change, that I am not the man who hurt you, but showing you is not enough. I need to ask you." He took her hands in his. He felt the calluses, the history of her hardship, and he did not flinch. He held them as if they were the most precious jewels in his collection. "I love you," he said, the words a raw, honest truth. "I think I started loving you the first time I heard you laugh in this very room. I was too proud and too afraid to admit it. I am not afraid anymore. I do not want you to be Julian's governess. I do not want you to be my employee. I want you to be my wife, my partner, my duchess. I want to spend the rest of my life earning the forgiveness I do not deserve." Tears were streaming down her face now, silent and cleansing. She did not pull her hands away. "Oh, Alistair," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Get up, you fool." He looked up, his heart in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" She laughed, a real, beautiful laugh that lit up her entire face. It was the sound he had been starving to hear for 2 years. "It means you are getting ash on your very expensive trousers," she said, her fingers tightening on his. "And yes, it is a yes." Their wedding was a quiet affair, attended only by a few close friends and a bewildered solicitor, but their life together was a loud and joyful symphony. Eleanor was not just a duchess, she was a force of nature. The reforms she had suggested for the estate were implemented, transforming the lives of their tenants. The school was built. The house, once a cold tomb, was filled with light and laughter. One winter evening, a year later, Alistair came looking for his family. He found them in the library, the place of Eleanor's greatest humiliation, now their sanctuary. A huge fire roared in the hearth. Julian, now 6, was curled on a sofa, fast asleep with a book on his chest, and on the floor, surrounded by architectural plans for a new county hospital, was his wife, his duchess. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, her face was smudged with charcoal from her drawings, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She looked up as he entered, and her face broke into that smile that was his alone. "We need more windows," she said, tapping a blueprint. "Hospitals should not be dark places." He came and sat on the floor beside her, pulling her into his arms. He breathed in the scent of her hair, a mix of roses and something uniquely her. He looked at his sleeping son, his brilliant wife, the warm, vibrant home they had built from the ashes of his pride. He had been a duke his entire life, but it was only now, in the arms of the disgraced governess, that he finally understood what it meant to be truly rich.